without alienating. First, a little bit about me. I am a doctor, and the important thing to understand about that is I'm a medical doctor, not a PhD, although I've done lots of graduate work in political science, in addition to getting my medical degree and studying psychiatry at UCSF. Most of what I studied in political science is political psychology. Political psychology is the study of how people come up with their attitudes and beliefs about politics and why they behave the way they do. So what I teach comes from two different directions. First of all, an understanding of how people think about politics specifically, but I also bring a set of clinical skills from psychiatry that help us communicate when people are feeling defensive or having strong emotions. And I've combined those to create a new field, which is political psychiatry. So let's begin with a bit of an overview. First off, I'm going to talk about why your conversations probably aren't working right now. And I make that assumption because there are very few people I talk with who tell me, oh, my conversations with people I disagree with about politics are going absolutely fine. Most of what I get is they're at the best, they're getting by, and at the worst, it's destroying their relationships. The next thing I'm going to do is introduce a better approach. And this is an approach that I've developed over several years of talking across partisan lines and drawing on the cutting edge research in the field of political dialogue. Third, I would like to, if there's time, do a demonstration of what this approach looks like in action. And for that, I would love to have a volunteer from the audience, somebody who can channel maybe the person in your life who you find most difficult to talk with about politics. And I will demonstrate how I would do it if I were having that conversation using these methods. And then finally, we'll go to a question and answer period, because usually once I give this presentation, people have a lot of questions about how this all plays out in real life. So let's go ahead and get started. Why are your conversations not working right now? In most cases, there are 5 big reasons why people have trouble with their political conversations. And the number one reason is that they think that the people that they're talking with and who disagree with them are either bad or dumb or crazy. And I use here an example of a poster that I've often seen on, or a meme I've often seen on the web that liberals use to describe Republicans. Republicans are people too mean, selfish, greedy people. But there are similar memes that have to do with liberals. This isn't something that conservatives do or liberals do. This is something we all do. But the reality is that we really aren't divided by nature. We are divided by nurture. When you look at where a person's political beliefs come from, they have very little to do with what their personality is or what their character is. Studies show that the best determinant of someone's political party is their parents' political party. Religion is a huge predictor of political party. Where we're from is a big predictor of political party and political beliefs. So we find that people who live in rural communities are much more likely to be conservative and vote Republican than people who live in urban communities. Race and ethnicity are huge predictors, as are sex, gender, and sexuality. And of course, socioeconomic status, what your income is, what kind of line of work you belong to, and what your parents' earning levels were, and what kind of line of work they were involved in. And let's not forget, as part of that, education. Whether or not you went to college is a huge predictor of whether you ultimately are a Republican or a Democrat. The second reason our conversations get into trouble is because we tend to tell others what to think. We go into conversations thinking that we have the right answer, and our job, we believe, in these dialogues is to tell other people why they need to get on board with our perspective. The problem with that is that telling others what to think triggers this thing called reactance. Reactance is an innate psychological dislike of feeling controlled. It's that thing I'm sure all of you who are parents saw in your 2 or 3-year-old. You know, you had this wonderful little toddler who went along with pretty much everything you asked them to do. And then all of a sudden they learn the word no, and they refuse to do what you asked them to do. And that's why we call it the terrible twos. And that emergence of that kind of independence and that refusal is the developmental stage for reactance. But reactance doesn't just show up when we're 2 years old. It follows throughout our lives. And you might know, if you've had a teenager, that teenagers are also really reactant. They don't like being told by their parents what to do, and will often do the opposite, if simply not because it makes sense, but because it means asserting their freedom from parental control. And while we see these things peak when children are 2 years old and when they're teenagers, the reality is that reactance is something that all human beings have. So none of us wants to be told what to think or what to do. And when you're having a political conversation with someone, you have to be very careful not to trigger that feeling that you are imposing your beliefs on the other person. Otherwise, they're automatically not going to listen to what you have to say. The third thing we do that gets in the way of productive conversation is that we make others feel bad about themselves. Sometimes we do this very overtly, telling people that if they believe that they're selfish, or that they're mean, or that they don't care about other people. Sometimes we say things like, you're racist, or go so far as to say you're an evil person if you voted for another candidate. But oftentimes, we make people feel bad about themselves without ever explicitly saying those things. We maybe just the tone of voice, or the way we look at someone, or the types of questions we ask, let them know that we think less of them because of their political beliefs. Here's the problem with that. Some of you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're not, Maslow was a psychologist back in the 1950s who wanted to understand why human beings do what they do. And so he started to study what kinds of motivations seem to be compelling people in their choices in life. And he came up with a hierarchy. He said, well, what people need is first to meet their physiological needs. That's their highest priority. And once they've met their physiological needs, then they're going to start worrying about safety, like personal safety, having a place to live. And once they feel safe, then they're going to prioritize love and belonging. They're going to be looking for a spouse and a family and a group to belong to. And once they have that, they're going to begin to prioritize self-esteem and having the esteem of others, having people look up to them. And only after all of that, he said, will people start looking at finding a sense of purpose in life. Now, when Maslow came up with this, it was a really big insight into understanding why people did what they did. And it kind of revolutionized psychology during its period. But since that time, what we found is that he was actually wrong. He thought that safety needs and physiological needs were the most important. And only after that came the feeling that we needed to belong and that we needed a sense of self-esteem. What we found since then is that often people would rather die than feel like they don't belong. People would rather die than lose their sense of self-esteem. It's more painful, more motivating to go out and seek those things. And because of that, that plays very much into our political activity, because when we ask people to change their political beliefs, we're basically asking them to give up the group that they belong to. We're asking them to sacrifice their personal identity. So imagine a person who has been raised as a Democrat their entire life, and they've spent the last 4 years talking about what a horrible president Donald Trump was. And somebody came along and told them that actually Donald Trump was a great guy and that they were wrong. For them to switch parties at that point and become a Republican would actually be very difficult, because they'd probably be facing the loss of their family and friends. They would be facing potentially alienation from people in their religion. They would have to face the fact that they had been wrong for an extended period, and that would lower their self-esteem. And it goes the other way too. For someone to change their mind who supported Donald Trump to decide that actually he wasn't all the things that they thought he was, means sacrificing their self-esteem, admitting that they were wrong, admitting that the people they had aligned themselves with weren't necessarily the best people. So it's very important to keep in mind that when we're asking people to change their minds, we're also asking them to change their group. We're asking them to potentially risk their self-esteem. The fourth reason we get into trouble in our political conversations is that we argue with reason and evidence. And I know for a lot of you, this one's going to be the most difficult to overcome, but hear me out. Evidence and reason work really well in a court of law. And they work well because the judge and the jury are committed to being unbiased. They come to the case with a pledge that they are not going to put the finger on the scales in either direction, but are going to weigh the arguments being presented to them fairly. The problem with applying that same standard to political conversations is that people don't come to political dialogue with as clean slates. We have very strong opinions. We have already made up our minds before we enter a political dialogue about who's right and who's wrong. So how can you make a difference in a political conversation where people are coming to the dialogue with such strong opinions to begin with? The answer is that it's a lot more like having a conversation with someone. When you're using reason and evidence, it's as if you're coming into a courtroom and trying to persuade the defendant that they're guilty, or trying to persuade the prosecutor that the defendant isn't guilty. It doesn't really matter what reason and evidence you present in those kinds of conversations. The fact is they're always going to come down on the side of, in the case of the defendant, that they're not guilty, and in the case of the prosecutor, that they are guilty. Reason and evidence aren't particularly effective. And one way to understand why this is happening is because our minds have a built-in belief defense system. We've all heard of the immune system, which defends us against viruses and bacteria and foreign materials that are potentially dangerous to our bodies, right? Well, our brains have something similar that protects us against foreign ideas, because foreign ideas can be really dangerous. if we were to accept any idea that was presented to us and considered it, then we wouldn't, we might get rid of thousands of years of human culture and human thought. We can't each individually rebuild human knowledge from scratch. We have to accept a certain amount of our cultural endowment as true and without question, simply in order to function. And how the brain does that is it causes us to evaluate new information that's coming in a biased fashion. We assume we're right until there is like a preponderance of reasons to change our minds. And it's not enough. We're not going to weigh the evidence just in terms of like simple criteria. It has to be much more proof in order for us to shift. So some of you may be familiar with the concept of motivated cognition. We actually look for reasons why we are right despite what the other person is saying in order to automatically refute what others have proposed. Another way that our minds defend against foreign beliefs is with social cognition. We rely very heavily on the points of view of the people around us. So if the people we love think something, and if our church thinks something, or our temple thinks something, or our community thinks something, or our local leader thinks something, then we will stick with that because it's the safest bet. If the people we already trust and care about believe something, then why should we take the risk of changing our minds? And the fifth reason people get into trouble in political conversations is because their emotions get in the way. We all get triggered sometimes. And even though it's not our fault and we don't intend to do it, the reality is that getting triggered is something that can really blow up a conversation and get in the way of being persuasive, even if we have really good points. Let's consider some of the things that happen when you're triggered that make you less persuasive. First off, being triggered means going into a state of fight or flight. And that means the portion of our brain that actually lights up and is kind of functioning for us is very primitive. The higher level functions go offline. And that means our cognition is turned off, essentially. The portions of our brain that are responsible for things like logic, impulse control, long-term planning, empathy, and memory become much more difficult to access. And we just go into this kind of automated mode where the only thing we can do is either fight or flee the conversation. And when cognition shuts down, we can't be strategic, we can't communicate clearly, and we often trigger other people because emotions tend to be contagious. So if you get triggered, it's very likely the other people will get triggered. And that means they'll go into cognitive shutdown as well. And you're just going to be speaking past each other. And if you've had a situation where you were having a political conversation with someone and you said some things that you later regretted, chances are this is exactly what happened. You got triggered, you started becoming irrational, and that is a natural outcome of being in a conversation where your emotions aren't under control. So I'm gonna just pause here and see if there are any big questions that people, was there anything that anybody was like, wait, what's happening here? Looking good? All right, excellent. That's great. And if there are questions, I can come back to them later on. I just wanted to give it a moment. All right, so we have all of these problems, these challenges that are happening in our conversations that are making them go kind of off the rails. What do we do to fix these problems? And now I'd like to offer a smarter way. I've developed what I call the change conversation pyramid to help us have these conversations. And what the pyramid shows you is basically what people need in a conversation to actually rationally engage and potentially change their minds during a dialogue. And the problem that most people make in a political conversation is they start at the top of the pyramid. They start with cognition. They start by talking about reason and evidence. They start by talking about facts. They start by debating policies and beliefs. That is pretty much a guaranteed way to run into trouble. What you need to do instead is start at the bottom of the pyramid and work your way up. So I'm going to walk you through the pyramid now, starting at the bottom and working our way up, and explain a little bit about what I mean about how to do each of these levels. So the bottom of the pyramid is comfort. Just a second. And when I say make people comfortable, what I mean is make them feel safe enough to stay in the conversation and to learn and to grow. So we talked before a little bit about how people sometimes go into fight or flight. And when we're in fight or flight, our cognition shuts down, our frontal lobes do not work properly, and we can't learn, we can't think. And so when you're in these conversations, it's very important to avoid the red area here, the fight or flight area. It's also not great to be in this totally green area. Green is too safe. So that's why I say safe enough. Green is where we are when we're having a conversation with someone who agrees with us on everything. It means we're not feeling challenged at all, and we're not necessarily thinking critically or growing in any way. What we want is for people to be alert enough to recognize that there are some differences here, interested and curious enough to take some risks and to want to understand better. So emotionally, where we want people to stay is in this growth zone, feeling safe enough to take risks, not so scared that they go into fight or flight, and not so comfortable that they're not examining their beliefs. Once we've made people feel safe enough, our next focus is really on connection. And connection means earning trust. It means getting to a place where the other person doesn't see you as bad, they don't see you as crazy, and they aren't worried that at any moment you might turn on them. It's important to understand how we build trust. So one of the best ways I've learned to build trust in a political conversation is to make myself vulnerable. I'm very honest up front about the fact that I see things a little differently, but I don't come at it from the place of, I see things differently and therefore you need to think like me. I come at it from a place of, well, I see things a little differently. I hope that you're not going to see me as a bad person because of that. I also go out of my way to let them know that I tolerate differences of opinion, that my view of them as a human being is not dependent on what they believe, that I judge their beliefs separately from how I judge them. So we let them know, it's okay that we disagree on this. It doesn't change the fact that I know you're a wonderful person. I disagree with you. I think you're wrong, but I still love you. At the same time, a great way to build trust is to remind people of all the things you do have in common, the ways in which you are alike, and the ways in which you do agree. Often when we're in a political conversation, we lose sight of all the ways in which we agree because we're so focused on the small areas of disagreement. And the last thing that I really like to do to build connection is to acknowledge my past errors. Sometimes this might be admitting that I've made mistakes in conversations in the past. Sometimes it means admitting that I've been wrong about politics in the past and that I'm hoping to improve. So all of those things build trust, build connection, and help you to move to the next level. The third level in the pyramid is comprehension. You need to learn their point of view before you start telling them what your point of view is. So how do you establish comprehension? It means being really curious, asking questions, and listening to understand rather than reply. Often when we get into political conversations, to the extent that we ask questions, we're asking questions to make a point, kind of like a prosecutor in a court of law, but that just makes people defensive and it doesn't change their mind. The kinds of questions that I really try to ask are questions that elicit stories, questions that get at why do you believe what you believe about politics? And for example, have you always had this belief or has it changed over time? Have you had any experiences in the past that influenced your thinking on this topic? Why is this particular issue so important to you? Is there something that happened in your life that made this really a meaningful issue? When you start coming at the topic with those kinds of questions, you are making it personal. And the more personal it is about like you and this other person and understanding them rather than about policies and issues, the more you're going to connect and show them that you really care. It's also important to actually listen to the answers they give after you ask these questions. One of the things we tend to be really bad at is listening. What we do in our culture is we take turns talking, and that's kind of at the best. A lot of times in political conversations, while the other person is talking, if we are listening to what they're saying, what we're doing is forming a list for our rebuttal, which is going to come up, all the ways in which they're wrong, which we're going to tell them as soon as they stop talking. But what you should really be doing is listening to understand, and understand it well enough that you could recite back what their argument is for what they believe in a way that they feel comfortable with. So the next step in comprehension is reflection. And reflection is really summarizing back to the other person what they've just said. So, for example, if I'm talking to a person about maybe gun policy, I might say something like, oh, so one of the reasons gun rights is so important to you is that you think having guns is important to protect against government tyranny. Is that right? And that's a way of showing that I've really been listening to what they say or what they've said. And when I say that, often what I get back is, yes, exactly. Why doesn't anybody else understand that? That is exactly right. And doing that shows them that this is a real conversation, that they can that you're listening. And once people feel heard, they're much more likely to be interested in hearing what you have to say too. The next level in the pyramid is compassion. And it's so common for us in political conversations to forget that we're talking with another person with feelings too. And it's really important to show that you care. And showing that you care isn't the same as saying you agree with another person. You don't have to believe that the thing they're worried about is actually true to express concern for their suffering about their beliefs. So just to give you an example of how this would play out, for example, in a clinical setting, I could have a patient come to me and they could be very distressed because they believe that they have a microchip implanted in their brain by the CIA. Now, as a doctor, I'm not going to sit there and have an argument with them and tell them, no, in fact, you don't have a microchip implanted in your brain, because I know it's not going to change their mind. Engaging with facts and reason with a delusional person doesn't have an impact on their thinking. Instead, what I'm going to say to them is, that must be a really awful experience for you. How are you coping with feeling that way? And then I'm going to hear them out and listen to their suffering. Because even though the microchip isn't real, the suffering is. And when you're having a political conversation, it's very important to recognize where the pain is. What is the emotion that's underlying all of this? So are they angry? Are they afraid? Are they sad? Are they grieving? Figure out what that emotion is. And make them feel better about it. And the best way to make them feel better about it is to name the emotion, tell them how sorry you are that they're going through that, and offer whatever support you can. You can do this with facial expressions, you can do it with body language, you can do it with words, you can do it with sounds. And one of the things I really like to do is to say, oh yeah, I have had a similar experience, and tell a story that is parallel to what they're saying. It's not necessarily the same, but gets at the underlying emotional tenor of the experience. That's how you show people you really care. Once you've gone through all of that and climbed the pyramid, then you can start thinking more about, okay, what are the beliefs that this person holds that are really getting like that are so different from mine, that might be that maybe I can start to shift a little bit. And the little bit is important here, because a lot of times what I see people doing in conversations is going in and thinking, well, I want to take a person who's totally conservative and flip them over to liberal. And doing that in a single conversation just isn't going to happen. You're not even going to do it on a single issue. You're not going to take somebody who is a strong supporter of gun control and convince them in a single conversation that gun control is a bad idea. So what do you do instead? The trick is to think of these conversations as dialogues over a period of time. You're planting a seed that, with nurturing and care, will eventually grow into a large tree. And in the beginning, all you should be looking for is a gentle shift in their point of view, not a radical change. One of the best ways to do this is by telling a story that kind of reframes the facts that they're currently, that you both kind of agree on about the situation. but not coming at it directly. And what I really like to do and believe is most powerful is to tell a personal story that's relevant to the policy issue at hand, that can cause them to maybe rethink their perspective. And when I get to demo, I'm going to give an example of how that's done. And it really depends on, your own personal story and what the issues are at hand. But you can draw on things that are very close to home to make these kinds of subtle shifts. And it takes practice, but you can get there. So next up, so that's the change conversation pyramid. We worked all the way from the bottom to the top. It's important to realize as you're climbing your way up that if at any point you stop providing comfort or you stop providing connection, the whole pyramid will collapse. So if you get to the top and start telling a person that they're crazy, the whole thing is it's not gonna work. You have to maintain a safe environment. You have to maintain trust to have any impact on their cognition at the top. So how can somebody do all of that in a real conversation? I mean, this is a lot, right, that's going on, and it just even thinking about it in a dialogue is really hard. So I've come up with a methodology to help you kind of manage conversations in a way that makes it easier. This is the change conversation cycle. And I have over time have come to think of it as kind of training wheels for political discussion. It's kind of awkward and clunky, particularly when you first start to use it, but it works. And what I can tell you is that when I first came up with the cycle, I was having a lot of conversations with people on social media, a lot of conversations with people who totally disagreed with me about politics and who would say some pretty inflammatory and obnoxious things to me. So I took this image and I pasted it up in the corner of my computer so that anytime I ran into trouble in a political conversation, I could just refer to it and remember kind of what was going on. So I would, someone would say something really inflammatory to me and I'd be very triggered and upset and about to say something mean back. And then I remember, wait, look at the change conversation cycle. What am I supposed to do next? And then I'd look and I'd see, oh, I'm supposed to listen and reflect. So I would take what they were saying to me and I'd reflect it back to them. So what exactly is the change conversation cycle? Basically, the first step is step one. When you are initiating a political conversation, you start by asking non-judgmental, open-ended questions. So those are the questions we were talking about before for getting at comprehension. So things like, so you're really, it sounds like you're really interested in this topic. How have you developed your beliefs on it? And you want to signal while you're doing that you aren't going to pass judgment on them. Sometimes it helps to say up front, well, I tend to think about these things kind of differently, but I'm really interested about what you thought about, Biden's latest policy on X. And so that kind of throws the door open to give them an opportunity to open up and tell you whatever it is they think. Your job next, after they give an answer, is or while they're giving the answer, is to listen as well as you can. Ask follow-up questions if you're not sure about their meaning, and then reflect back what you've heard them say. So you're going to summarize it, highlight any strong emotions they might be expressing, and then ask them, so is that right? Did I get that right? If they say no, that you didn't get it right, then go back to the ask and say, oh, okay, well, can you explain it to me a little more, or ask another question to clarify, and listen and reflect again, and keep doing that until they feel like you really get it. The next step, after they feel like you really get it, is to agree. And again, this is hard, but agreeing works when you focus in on things like emotions, goals, and values. It's really hard to agree on things like policies, politicians, and parties. So forget about trying to agree on those. Instead, focus on goals, values, and emotions, because those are things there's always going to be a lot of common ground around. Even, for example, when talking about as divisive an issue as abortion, you can get almost everyone across the political spectrum to agree on the goal of reducing unwanted pregnancies. And so focusing on something like that is an excellent way to move forward. The last step in the cycle is to share your perspective. But again, you can't share your perspective by making a reasoned argument, because their belief defense system will react against that and defend, and they're not going to be able to hear it. So instead, try to share a story, ideally a personal story, that suggests maybe a slightly different way of viewing the issue than they have been thinking of before. What you definitely don't want to do and share is to go head to head. All of these steps, 1, 2, 3, and 4, have been about creating an alliance, about getting on the same side. And if you go in and then start to argue with them in step 5, you undo all the work you've done up to that point. So instead, all you're going to be doing is sharing a story that suggests a slightly different way of doing things. As for how the cycle works over time, you can go through the cycle multiple times in a single conversation. You could go through part of the cycle in a single conversation. Sometimes I find I only have time to get through ask and listen and reflect, and I don't have time to do the rest. I might just do ask and listen because other things are going on, but I know I'm going to come back to the dialogue at some point and we'll continue. And you can go through the cycle in future conversations as well. So this is a cycle that is recurring over time. And over time, the other thing that happens is, I said these are kind of like training wheels. Over time, the cycle becomes internalized, so you don't have to think about it so much. I really don't have to look at any diagram or picture to help me have these conversations. It all comes naturally at this point. And so the more you practice, the more that will happen for you too. Okay. So what I'd like to do, wow, it suddenly got very dark. I think my computer will adjust. There we go. Are there any questions at this point before we dive into a demo of how this all works?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Judy. So not a question really, but would it be possible for you to demo the don't do option, the wrong way?
Sure.
And I am loving this, and I think that it's great preparation, not only for our friends, families, neighbors, but also for when NCJW goes to Washington Institute and sits down with our legislators who are often on the other side of the fence. So thank you.
Sure, my pleasure. Yeah, it's I can definitely demo both versions depending on our time situation. So if our leaders can provide a little guidance on that, that would be helpful.
Yes, it's 20 after 8. So I think we have a little bit of time for you to do that and for some
Okay.
questions.
Okay, excellent. But I will need some volunteers. So
I'm happy to.
fabulous. So do you want to, are you happy to, do you want to do both demos with me? Like, well, first I'll talk to you kind of the wrong way, and then we will do it the right way so people can see how it all goes. Okay, excellent. And are you going to be channeling like a loved one who you tend to have trouble with?
A friend who doesn't see eye to eye on an issue like Build Back Better or abortion. Either one would be
Okay,
awesome.
excellent. Yeah, let's do it. You choose which.
Let's do Build Back Better because that's
Build Back
really
Better.
topical.
Sounds good. All right. I'll just call you Eleanor. Is that okay?
That's great.
Okay.
I'll just
Hi,
call
Eleanor.
you. I'll just call you Dr.
No,
Tamerius.
just call me Karin, please.
I'll just call you Karen. Hi, Karen. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm a little worried about the economic situation these days and feeling like my pocketbook is hurting.
Oh, really? Like, well, are you suggesting that this is something political, or are you having trouble at your work?
Well, yeah, there's been a lot of furloughing at work. There's like 2 lines at the supermarket that had cashiers at them because people aren't getting jobs. You know, my son and daughter-in-law aren't getting any relief, and childcare is killing them in terms of their budget. But
well, you know, that makes it one of a great reason for this Build Back Better plan that Biden just passed. I am so excited about this. Have you been hearing about it?
I have, but it's such a lot of money, and you know, I don't want my taxes to go
No,
up.
in the grand scheme of things, it is not a lot of money.
$1.85 trillion.
Well, you know,
It's crazy.
that is nothing compared to the amount of taxes that rich people are getting out of in this country. Are you aware of like the corporations that have like not paid taxes in years?
Yeah, that is disgusting. I can't believe that. And you know, I'm squarely in the middle class and we're hurting. But you know, I heard Comcast doesn't pay any. I don't know where Biden is going to get the money for this. So I don't think it's going to happen.
So you think that, so you think this isn't, that Biden isn't going to pull this off?
Yeah, I don't see how he can, especially with Manchin and Sinema.
Well, I don't think you really understand how good a politician Biden is.
Oh, wow. You think?
You don't think he's that good?
I don't know. It's just that our government is so polarized. It's just, I don't see it happening, Karen.
You know, this is the thing with you, is that you're really cynical. And I think you need to get beyond that.
Oh, and you're crazy if you think this is gonna work. I mean, time and time again, we get nowhere.
And you think Trump would do better.
Oh, I wouldn't say that, but anyway, maybe we need to just agree to disagree. We'll see. Maybe by 2030 or 2050, when I'm dead and gone, we'll have a safety net, a social safety net. But with our present situation in the United States, we're goners.
All right, let's cut. I don't know how well we did with the sparring. I felt like we didn't get heated enough. You were too nice.
Oh gosh.
What did others think?
I felt like you put each other on the defensive immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was waiting for it to build up a little bit more. And I think that because maybe it was uncomfortable that you put each other on the defensive, you sort of backed off a little bit, but I could feel that there was no comfort established. It was immediately that kind of sparring. And yeah. And then when you called her cynical, that
And I called her crazy.
crazy. Yeah.
That
didn't help.
No.
I just can't imagine getting into these conversations anymore. I mean, I've just turned it off. Because I think it's hopeless.
You think it's hopeless?
I do.
So do you have a family member who's particularly difficult?
Who's particularly what?
Challenging to talk with?
I just don't talk to them.
Would you be willing to pretend what it would be like?
I guess. I'm not quite sure I could do it.
Well,
Sure.
What do you think?
All right.
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it.
Karen, can I ask a question before you do that?
Yeah.
So in your the pyramid.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of feeling when I look at it that you're successful if you can even have a conversation and not get to cognition and get them to sort of agree. But like if we're just having a conversation, just how to have it and not have to get there, is it still successful in the sense? Because I think that like along Sherry's line, like there's going to be certain viewpoints we're not going to change. But if we could just talk about it, would be a nice.
Right. So my friend David Camps, who's the author of the White Ally Toolkit, which I highly recommend to everyone, says that a conversation is successful if two things happen. One, if at some point you express yourself authentically. And two, if the other person is willing to talk with you again afterwards. Okay, that's it. Like, it's a very low bar. And I agree with him. Like that's what you should be shooting for if you're talking with someone. If this is like your first conversation with someone who strongly disagrees with you, that's what you should be aiming for. Over time, as you have more dialogues, you're going to build up trust. And you're going to build up a relationship that can tolerate greater amounts of disagreement and more dialogue around, where that's coming from and those sorts of things. But in the beginning, it's okay to aim low and build up your confidence and their confidence and your mutual trust.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, let's just agree to disagree, because otherwise it gets too heated.
Right.
And I don't feel like that serves any purpose.
So it's interesting because I knew this was, I usually have a part of my presentation where I talk about why we have to have these conversations, even though it's really, really hard. And I kind of cut that out because I was worried about time. But there are a couple of reasons why I think it's absolutely essential. And one of the big reasons has to do with the state of our democracy. Like, there's a lot of evidence right now, whether you are on the right or left, that there is increasing cynicism in our country and declining faith in the ability of democracy and democratic institutions to continue to function. And because of that, there is increasing support for political violence on both the right and the left. Now, that sets us up for, authoritarianism, without a doubt. It undermines, we in the United States have what we political scientists call a crisis of political legitimacy. A significant portion of the American public believes that our president was not legitimately elected. And one of the most important things we need to start doing is having conversations to restore faith in the legitimacy of our government. And even if you're not having a dialogue that's going to, convince a Republican to become a Democrat or a Democrat to become a Republican, what you can do is form an alliance to protect our democracy. And that is just incredibly important right now.
Okay. How
to have the conversation? Well,
how do you get to the point of being able to have that conversation?
Right. Well, that's what I want to do the demonstration for tonight. And so I need somebody to channel really well, somebody who you think is absolutely impossible to talk with.
Hmm.
Do you want
I
to
don't
do it,
have that
Sherry?
person.
No, because unfortunately, most people know what my answer is to these people. Like, I just don't have time anymore. Life is too damn short. I'm 75 years old. I can't, I fought the fights and did the battles. And I, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to deal with these people anymore because
Yeah.
I think they're immoral.
Yeah.
That's probably a bad place to, to try to start a conversation.
Part of the reason you have these conversations is we have them with our loved ones is out of because we know them well enough to know they're not bad people, that we know that they are making bad choices, but they are not bad people. But for me, look, this is what keeps me going, is I have 3 teenage, well, not older even now than teenage sons, but I decided to get involved in doing this work because I was worried about the future of American democracy. I decided my children needed a democracy more than they needed a full-time mom. And I went back to doing this kind of work because of that. And when I think about them and I think about the state of our planet, when I think about the crises we're facing, I'm not willing to step back and stop fighting. But another issue that always comes up for me when I think about this is, I do a lot of work on white allyship and white people talking with their white peers, family members about race and racism. And I think that is especially important because we can't ask people of color to be out there doing advocacy for themselves. Like, this is work for people of high privilege in particular. So that is one of those things where I feel like if I step back, I'm actually kind of taking advantage of my privilege as a white woman, as an educated woman, as a cis heterosexual woman, that I don't, I probably am going to be fine no matter what happens, but there are a lot of people who are going to suffer, and I want to make a difference anyway. Does that make sense? Or
No, I want to say something, may I?
yeah.
Barbara. It says Bruce, but it's Barbara.
Hi,
My
Barbara.
computer didn't work. What I hear you saying, which I think is wonderful, because this is something that NCJW works on and feels very strongly about, that as an organization, we constantly have these discussions at the Washington Institute and elsewhere about white privilege and how we can be the ones to make so much of the difference, that we can't expect the Black community to do this alone, that we need to be the ones out there showing where we're coming from and how we can help. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm really proud of our organization because we feel so strongly about this.
But it is hard. Like, there is
Very
no
hard. Very
question that this is incredibly hard work.
Yes, it is.
This is Joan. Can I say something? I agree with you that white people have to take up Black's point of view, but I also feel they have to advocate for themselves. And I feel women, I'm not going to depend on men to straighten out all our problems. I think women have to advocate for ourselves.
That's true.
Yeah,
I think it comes from both sides.
absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that's kind of interesting is that, and I realized this when I work with David Campt, is that who's a Black man, and he teaches white allyship. But one of the ways in which I help him is by teaching him some of the things that white people hear in their own homes and communities from other white people, things that they won't say in the presence of a Black man. And that's part of like learning what's special about the kinds of conversations we're able to have in our homes about race, with our white family members that Black people just are never privy to.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah. So can we
we-
do a demo of the discussion, or of like a challenge, a real convo?
Mm.
I'll be glad to do it with you.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So do you have someone you can channel?
Yes, I do. I have a very best friend. We were, practically grew up together, young mothers together. I always thought our values were the same. And it turns out that during this very divisive time, she has made some comments that lead me to believe that she's on the opposite side. So what I have found myself doing is first not wanting to be in her company, and then telling myself that we have been best friends for so many years. How can I do this?
Right.
And so I have been seeing her, but neither one of us talk about it.
Mhm.
Occasionally she'll say something, but I can feel myself get tense inside, but
Yeah.
I change the topic.
Okay, let's do it. This is
Okay.
perfect.
Okay.
I'll start. Do you
Sure.
want me to just call you Char, or should I call
Oh,
you something?
Char, yep, Char's
Okay.
good.
All right. Hi, Char. It's really good to see you.
Oh, I missed you, and I'm so glad we have this chance to get together.
Yeah, we don't get together enough. But I've been wanting to get together with you, just to hang out. But also, there is something I want to talk with you about. And I have to be honest with you that it's something I've been thinking about for a really long time. And I'm actually kind of scared to talk with you about it.
Now you're making me nervous.
Oh, well,
Okay.
It is, no, I mean,
What is it?
don't be, it's gonna be hard, I think, for both of us to talk about, but I want you to know that I love you. We have been friends forever. I always want you in my life, no matter what, okay?
I feel the same way. I love you too.
Okay,
All
okay.
right. Let me have it. What is it?
It's okay, it's politics. And you and I have not talked politics much lately because I think we have the sense that we are kind of on opposite sides of the issues. And I've really been afraid to ask you what your beliefs are. And my political beliefs are really important to me. So it's hard when I'm with somebody who thinks differently. But what I want to do is, because I know you and I trust you and I believe in you, I want to hear what you think. Like, what is your perspective on things? And I promise not to pass judgment on you because I know you're a good person. I just want to understand, and I want us to get past this kind of secret.
Thanks, Karen. I appreciate your saying that and bringing it up. And I have to tell you, this is scary for me because, I'm the kind of person that doesn't usually, I get passive and I don't like to argue. So I hope this, that we can talk about this in a way that's comfortable for both of us. There have been a few comments that you've made when we've had telephone conversations or when we were together that were in a way hurtful to me because I know you've always been supportive of me. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. Some of the things that you have said, not about that particular topic, but some of the other things lead me to believe that you think in a way that you're not supportive to me. Because if you think that way about these other things and you listen to the particular news station that you listen to, I feel like you're kind of against me.
So, okay. So you've been hurt by some of the things I've said.
Yes.
Well, okay. I'm sorry that I've hurt you. And, sometimes I know I don't always say things in the most considerate way. And like you, I have really strong feelings about these topics. And sometimes it doesn't always come out great. Can you say a little bit more about the kinds of things that I said?
Sure. I mean, you talked about the immigration situation. We're all a product of immigrants who came to this country, and the things that you've said in relation to that are so against what I believe. You made some statements once when we were in a conversation and I was feeling so low about the situation in the country, and you made light of it and said you thought that things were great in the country. So I really felt like I had to get off the phone because I just was so tight in my chest.
Oh, okay. Wow. So what I hear you saying is that you think immigration is something that should be happening, and that I'm not really as supportive of immigrants as you are, and you find that really upsetting.
Yes, absolutely. That was very upsetting to me.
Yeah. This is one of those situations where I think we might have a little more common ground than we necessarily recognize. Sometimes I kind of fly off the handle on topics. I get a little triggered, and I'm particularly unhappy right now with some of the things that are happening. But there are immigrants who, there are situations where immigrants, I think, are appropriate, and situations where immigration might be more problematic. But I never mean to suggest that immigration is all a bad idea. And I want us to be able to talk about this. And just to kind of give you an understanding of where I'm coming from, you know, I worry a bit about unlimited immigration. It's not that I have a problem with immigration per se, but sometimes when I think about, you know, people coming to our country and being it is a different situation if they have someone who can take care of them, or if they come to the country and they have somewhere to live. But I worry a little bit about, you know, I get heartbroken when I see people living on the street and people who don't have enough food. Like, I worry that sometimes in our country, you don't have enough to go around. Do you ever worry about that?
Sure. You know, I'm glad that you told me that, Karen, because, you know, it makes me feel that you are compassionate and that you're coming from a place where your reasons make sense to you. I know there are a lot of topics that we probably disagree on. I'm glad that you brought it up. I don't want this to mess up our friendship ever. So, you know.
But you know what we can do? We can keep talking about it. And my guess is there are, you know, more areas we agree on. And I know you're a good person, and you know I'm a good person. And maybe what we should do is we work together a little bit to figure things out. You know, I'm sure you have good ideas that I don't have, and I may have some ideas you don't have, and maybe we can learn about this stuff together, put our heads together a bit.
That sounds good. The only thing is that if sometimes something is said that makes me feel really tight, I may have to say, let's not go there right now.
Yeah, you know, I get triggered too. So what I don't want is for us to like never talk about things because it might be hard. Like,
Yeah, and I
you know,
think
if we can just kind of name it and say, you know what, talking about this right now is, I'm getting a little triggered. Can we kind of put a pin in it and come back to it later when we're feeling better?
I'm good with that.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay.
Let's
Thank you.
do that. Yeah. All right. Time out.
Okay.
Okay. To
yeah.
be clear, that was not I was not channeling myself there. It always gets a little wonky in these role plays because you're not necessarily being yourself. So I was using the tools, but pretending to be someone with different political beliefs, which
Right.
is always challenging.
And I was pretending you were my friend. I had to envision her in your little box.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know it's 10:09, and if anyone has any questions, because I think we need to wrap this up.
Yeah.
I know Karin has another presentation after hours. So are there any other quick questions that anyone has? I can't see everyone, so if you do, you know, unmute yourself and just speak up. Okay. Well, Well, at this point, I want to thank you very much, Karen, for your presentation tonight.
Yeah.
And for bringing out the actress in me. And I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I hope that you learned a lot from this and that you're able to apply it the next time your best friend or your wife or your husband or whoever it might be has a different point of view or belief from your own. The world right now is filled with divisiveness. So let's be kind. Again, thank you to everyone. And thank you so very much, Karen.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All
That was
right.
great.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night to everyone.
Good night.
Thanks,
Happy
Karen.
Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Bye, Karen. Thank
Bye-bye.
you
Happy
again.
holiday, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Happy holiday.
And a happy Thanksgiving
holiday.
and holidays to everyone. For sure.
Good.
What?
If anyone has anything they'd like to say at this point, unmute yourself because otherwise I'll cut the Zoom off.